Thanks. Can you hear me all right? The sound does this good? Okay, good. So first of all, thanks very much for the invitation. I'm always delighted to see philosophy being done outside of the academic arena, and I'm delighted to be a small part of it. So keep it up. It's great. Despite what Nick said, I'm not actually going to try and argue against the existence of souls, not directly. I'm more interested in sort of investigating the question and you might say investigating a challenge to the view that there are souls in this very precise sort of Cartesian sense. So let me see if this goes forward. No, not that.
The down one should move it on. Not working?
No, it's not having any effect. Just...
No?
Now it's going. Okay, so you may have heard of this view called Cartesian dualism, named after René Descartes from way back in the 17th century, and it says that there are two kinds of things. That's why it's called dualism. Right? There are two kinds of things. There are thinking things and material things, and by thinking thing I mean a thing with a mental life. Okay, something that's conscious, or has beliefs or preferences or memories or some sort of psychological life. That's what I mean by a thinking thing. Okay? And that's what Descartes meant by a thinking thing. A material thing is a thing made of matter. Okay, something with physical properties like mass or size or density or temperature, something like that. You know, like a rock. Is that clear? Okay. Not controversial so far. The controversial bit is, there we go, that these two kinds are exclusive, but nothing can belong to both kinds. No thinking thing is a material thing. A material thing couldn't possibly have any sort of mental life. What's next? So this means that what we call a human being is really two things. Right? There's an immaterial thinker, and you might call that a soul. This is a technical sense of the word soul. It's an immaterial thinking thing. Okay, and that's what I'm going to mean by soul. I mean, it's what Aaron Segal and I mean by soul in the book called Do We Have Soul? Okay, the word soul has lots of different meanings. It's a very confusing word if you're not. Yes, it's. Used in all sorts of informal ways, you know, manic depression has captured my soul. You know, that's features of pop music a lot. That's not what I'm talking about, right? It's an immaterial thinking thing. Okay, so a human being is two things: an immaterial thinking thing or soul, and a biological organism, which is not thinking, right? Which you might call a body. Okay, the word body is also problematic in lots of ways. I'd rather call it an organism, but I won't worry about that for now. Okay, so it follows that thinking things, souls, are entirely immaterial, right? Yes, so seeing as you and I are thinking things, it follows that you and I are entirely immaterial. So what you see here is not me, it's just my body. It's the organism that my soul, that I am somehow attached to, right? Okay, so again, a material thing, no matter what it's like, even if it's got a magnificent brain like this one, right? A material thing cannot be conscious, cannot have memories, cannot have beliefs. It can be no more conscious than a stone can be. All right. At most, it can be attached in some way to an immaterial soul. Okay. And for some reason, stones are not attached to material souls, as far as we know. I'll come back to this question, to the question of why that is the case in a while. Clear so far? Good. Okay. And the same goes for all sentient beings. So what's happened to my chicken? There it is. So that should come soon. Okay, so a chicken, I take it that chickens have mental lives. Okay, so a chicken is really two things. There's the physical organism that you see and runs around the barnyard, and there's the immaterial soul that is conscious and hungry and avaricious and whatever else, fearful of Thanksgiving, whatever else that goes through a chicken's mind. Okay. Right. And yes, the main alternative to Cartesian dualism is that thinking things are material things. Right? Not many people doubt that there are thinking things and material things. The alternative is that these two categories are compatible after all. Right? So I'm a thinking thing and I'm also a material thing. That's materialism. Okay. Right. Now, nearly all Cartesian dualists say that the soul and the body interact. Okay. Most obviously, my body obeys my instructions. It does what I want it to do. So my intention or act of will moves my body. I want to raise my arm as an example. My mental act gets my arm to rise. So my body responds, to some extent anyway, to my commands. All right. And likewise, my body's sense organs, these eyes and these ears and so on, give me the soul information about my surroundings. Right. So I'm getting a sensation, a visual sensation of a darkly lit room full of attentive philosophers. Okay. So the body acts on the soul acts on the body. They communicate. So the relation between the soul and the body is a bit like the relation between the operator, a human being, and a drone that he operates. Okay, so just as the moving the joystick on the controls causes the drone to move in certain ways. Okay, just as I can move my body, and likewise the drone, if it's got a camera attached to it, gives the operator visual information about its surroundings. Okay, so the soul communicates with the body in much the same way as the operator communicates with the drone. It goes back and forth. Is that clear? Yes. Okay. Good. Now, this is all very familiar. Now, the most familiar and common objection to Cartesian dualism, which goes right back to Descartes' lifetime in the 17th century, is that this communication between the body and the soul is mysterious or impossible. Okay, the thought is, how could a non-physical event in the soul make something happen in the body? And likewise, how could something physical in the body make a difference to what happens in this entirely non-physical soul? And there are particular reasons why this was troublesome for Descartes, because of his account of the nature of physical, of material objects and causation and so on. Even apart from that, you can see that there's a bit of a mystery here. I mean, the soul is able to move the body, and yet it can't be detected by any, you can't see it. It can't be detected by any scientific instrument. It's elusive, and yet it's got all this power to make things happen. It's a bit of a mystery at best. And this objection comes in lots of variations, and it's a large topic in the philosophy of mind. It's not what I want to talk about. Actually, I want to talk about a different sort of interaction or connection between the soul and the body. Okay, leave aside the action and perception interaction, the communication between the soul and the body. That there's something quite different. That namely, that the soul cannot function without the body. That is, without a healthy nervous system. Right? The soul depends on the body in a way that the body does not depend on the soul, and that's where head injuries come in. Okay, it's not that I'm a big boxing fan, but I love this photograph and the other one. Okay, so imagine that you get hit in the head. Okay, maybe a bit harder than this unfortunate chap here lying on the canvas, but not hard enough to kill you. Okay, what would you expect to happen if Cartesian dualism is true? Right, so you would expect the communication between the soul and the body to be disrupted. Okay, head injuries might disrupt the exchange, so that the body would know what might stop sending signals to the soul. Right, so the body might stop sending me. My sense organs might stop sending me visual and auditory sensations because the brain that processes them is temporarily out of action. Okay, so you would expect everything to go dark. Okay, and silent. And my body might also stop obeying my commands or stop hearing them because the bit that the receiver, so to speak, in the brain is again not temporarily not working because of the trauma. Okay. But you would expect the soul to continue functioning so that I remain conscious. Yeah, it would be just like in the case of the it would be like damaging the remote control drone, right? If the drone that you're flying crashes into a brick wall and is damaged, you might expect it to stop sending you pictures. And you might expect it to stop responding to your commands because it's broken. Yeah, but it wouldn't knock you out. You'd remain conscious and wonder what was happening. And in the same way, right, if the soul relates to the body like an operator relates to the drone, you would expect damage to the body to disrupt the communication between the soul and the body, but to leave the soul function. Does that make sense? Good. Okay. But of course, we know that that's not what happens. Right? When you get hit on the head and it stops your brain working, it knocks you out completely. Right? All mental activity stops. Okay. And it's as if the drug, and that's rather surprising. On the assumption that mental activity is non-physical activity going on in the soul. Why would stopping something physical stop this wholly non-physical thing from functioning? It's as if damaging the drone caused its operator to go completely unconscious. That would be utterly mysterious. Okay, so that's a quite different sort of mystery from interaction for Cartesian dualists. Okay, we can illustrate the same thing if you think about what happens if you consume a lot of alcohol, as the picture might suggest, right? It doesn't stop your mental activity altogether, but it alters it, it slows it down. It hinders your mental activity if you drink too much. Okay, and again, that's a bit mysterious, given that alcohol has only a physical effect on the brain. Why should that stop? Why should that make the non-physical soul become sluggish and confused and forget what its keys are, and so on. Right. So again, you wouldn't expect completely non-physical activity in the soul to depend on physical activity in the body in this way. So the facts about head injuries and alcohol consumption and so on, it also happens in general anesthesia. That's how general anesthesia works. It just shuts down your mental life completely so that you don't notice, you don't feel anything, and you don't react in any way when the surgeons cut you open. Right? In fact, anesthesia shuts down your mental life quite profoundly. It knocks you up much more deeply than in sleep, or I suppose with most head injuries anyway. So it shows that the body and the soul have to be connected in well, a deeper way than a drone and its operator. That is, they don't just communicate, right? Because the damage to the brain doesn't just stop the communication or slow it down or hinder it. It stops the functioning of the soul. The body gives the soul something that the soul needs in order to function at all, on the assumption that there is a soul. That is, okay. It's a bit like, it's as if the soul is a light bulb. A light bulb needs a power source in order to function. Without that power source, it's just inert. It just doesn't work at all, right? And in the same way, the soul needs something. It needs to be plugged into something like a power source in order to function. Otherwise it doesn't work. It's dead, right? So somehow the brain gives the soul something that it needs, something like electricity to the light bulb, though of course it doesn't, it's not actually electricity. It can't be anything physical, because the soul is entirely non-physical. So it can't literally be energy, because energy is a physical quantity. It has to be something else. So yes, so the body has to give the soul something in order to enable the soul to function. That's a different sort of interaction or dependence of the soul and the body, quite independent of the communication that features in the traditional interaction problem. Okay. Here's a related fact about the dependence of the mental on the physical. Physically normal organisms always have a normal mental life. If a relative of yours were unconscious, let's say, delivered to the hospital unconscious, and the doctor told you that there was nothing physically wrong with her. She's physically perfectly normal, she's just unconscious. Well, you would look for a different doctor, wouldn't you? You know that can't be right. Whenever someone is unconscious or has some severe mental defect of one sort or other, temporary or permanent, there's always some physical cause or physical correlation of that. Something is wrong with the person's brain. You don't find a healthy brain correlated with a badly defective mental life, or with no mental life at all, right? If your mental life comes to stops, it's because there's something wrong with your brain. That's there aren't any known exceptions to that. It might not be obvious what's wrong with your brain, but it's clear that something is. There must be something that can cause it. Likewise, similar brains are always correlated with similar mental lives. So you don't find a human being like Nick with a physically normal human being like Nick with a normal human brain, but the mental life of a small child, or the mental life of a dog or a chicken. This doesn't happen. Human brains, human bodies are always correlated with human mental lives, human mental capacities, with human souls, you might say. Okay, and likewise, you don't find chickens with the psychology of human beings. And more generally, you never find a mental difference without a physical difference. Again, you don't find two beings physically exactly the same, but mentally radically different. Right? Given that mental life goes on in the soul, that means that physically similar objects have always got mentally similar souls. And this is just something that we observe. And you might wonder why that is. Where am I? Let's see. Okay, so yes, so we can make these points more vivid by imagining a duplicating machine. Do you know Calvin and Hobbes? Mm-hmm. It was a wonderful comic strip but in the US back in the 1980s and 90s. I recommend that there's lots of philosophy. But in one episode, Calvin, who is this mischievous little tyke with the blonde hair, invents in his fantasy, of course, a duplicating machine. And what it does is it exactly duplicates any physical object. Okay, so it creates an atom for atom duplicate of the original object. So if you put your toaster in the duplicator, press the button, a new toaster comes out exactly the same as the original one, okay, without damaging the original, of course. It would be, I was going to say, it would be a wonderful device to have. I'm not so sure whether that's right, actually. Anyway, imagine putting a human being into a duplicating machine, as Calvin does. What would you expect to come out? Well, you'd get a physical organism, physically identical to the original, right? Atom for atom, the same physiology, same brain, same brain waves, everything. But would it be conscious? Would it have any mental life? Well, we would expect it to have a mental life. In fact, we would expect it to have a mental life exactly like the original person. And that is what happens in the comic strip, of course, which must be the right answer, right? Calvin makes a duplicate of himself and orders the duplicate to do his homework for him and to go to school in his place and to do all of his chores at home and so on, so that Calvin can, put up his feet and relax. Of course, you can guess what happens next, right? The duplicate says, "What? You must be joking." And he refuses, of course. The duplicate is no more willing to do those things than Calvin himself was, so his plan is foiled. Yeah, that's what you would expect. But that just shows that you would expect a physical duplicate of you to be a mental duplicate as well, because of this correlation between the mental and the physical that we observe in everyday life. Is that clear? Good. Okay. So this is the dependence of the mental on the physical. First, you can't have mental life without a functioning nervous system. That's what we learned from head injuries, right? You get hit in the head hard enough, and it stops your mental life. Every animal with a normally functioning nervous system has got a mental life. We don't find, say, a duplicate of Nick without any mental life at all. And you wouldn't expect to find it anyway. And you don't find physically normal animals, whether human or otherwise, with no mental life at all. Okay. Physically similar animals have got similar mental lives. Yeah. You don't find physically normal human beings with the mental lives of children or dogs or chickens. Okay, those are the things that we observe. This is exactly what we would expect if mental activity were a physical activity going on in the brain. Right? Because duplicate the brain, you duplicate the physical, and you duplicate the mental. That's what you would expect if the mental just is a special case of the physical. Right? So hitting you on the head would stop your mental life because your mental life is something physical, and the head injury stops sort of physical activity in the brain. Just what you would expect. Again, you wouldn't expect a physically normal human being to have the mental life of a toddler, because it's got normal physical activity in its brain, and that normal physical activity is or causes it is that person's mental life, just as the materialist says. Okay, is that clear? It's not what we would expect to find if mental activity were an entirely non-physical activity taking place in an immaterial soul. Like in that case, it would be surprising if, on the face of it anyway, if tinkering with the brain, even putting a very small amount of those chemicals that anesthetists use into the brain, stopped it from working at all. In that case, if mental life took place in the soul, we wouldn't expect any correlation between mental differences and physical differences. So it seems on the face of it, you would, just as you wouldn't expect any correlation, just as you wouldn't expect damaging the drone to affect the mental life of the drone operator in any direct way. Yeah. Okay, so there has to be more to the dualist story than unthinking bodies, thinking souls, and the communication between action and perception. They don't relate just like drones and their operators. There has to be something more. It's almost as if the body is like a drone that, well, it's almost as if the activity of the drone is needed for the operator to remain conscious, to be conscious at all. Imagine a drone that will, yes, imagine operating a drone which would not be unconscious if it got damaged. That's how it is with the soul and the body, according to Cartesian dualism. So, of course, the question arises: why is the soul able to function without the body's help? Obviously, it can't if the soul exists, but we want to know why. What does the body give the soul to enable the thing? How is the what is the mechanism for the body's keeping the soul running or working? What does the body give the soul to enable it to keep working? Something that's what is the analog of the electricity that lights up, that makes the light bulb work? Why do we never find a healthy body without a soul? And why do physically similar bodies always have psychologically similar souls, as we've seen? These are all questions that arise for the Cartesian dualist. Okay, is that clear? Okay, not quite such an affirmative, just such a strong affirmative, but some nuance anyway. Okay, so the most common answer to this question, the answer to this question that contemporary dualists generally give, that dualism is a minority position among professional philosophers, very much a minority position, but there are quite a number, a fair number of them, I should say, some of them quite eminent, actually, so it's not as if no one holds this view in the 21st century. What they usually say is this, that the nervous system creates soul and sustains it in being. At least this is part of the answer to these questions, anyway. Okay, so when the nervous system reaches a certain stage in its development, it produces a soul. It creates it by a natural process. Okay, it's like, as they put it, an electric current being produced by a coil of wire. And we tell electricity through the coil, which is a magnetic field. And just as a coil produces a magnetic field, the brain produces a soul when it's in the right state. Okay, and that's so the reason why the duplicate of you would have a mental life just like yours is that it would create the soul just like yours. Just as a duplicate of a coil of wire will produce a magnetic field as well when power runs through it, as in the picture. Sorry. And likewise, sorry, physically similar organisms will have similar mental lives because they will produce psychologically similar souls. Okay, as you would expect. Right? It's the same mechanism, so it should have the same number. Does that make sense? Okay. What's the alternative to emergent? This is sometimes called emergent dualism. What's the alternative about where the soul comes from and why it depends on the body? Well, it seems to be this, that the supreme being, the man upstairs, the higher powers, miraculously create a soul and attach it to an animal at the appropriate moment. So when the human being or chicken or dog or whatever reaches the right stage of its embryonic development, the man upstairs miraculously creates the soul and attaches it to that animal body. Attaching it just means setting up a certain causal connection between them, so that the action and perception can take place, and the soul depends for its workings on the body. Okay, and the reason why you don't find human beings with the mental lives of dogs is that he always takes care to attach the right sort of soul to a given body. So he attaches the soul with mental properties that match the animal's physical properties. So that's why the physical duplicate of Calvin is a mental duplicate of his as well, because it's the policy of the supreme being to attach the same sort of soul to the same sort of body, okay, for reasons known only to himself. Okay. Is that clear? Okay. Now, this is, I think, a very interesting. So again, nearly all contemporary dualists are emergent dualists, and they're generally happy with this view. They're happy that they're content to say that the body creates the soul at the right moment and then sustains it in being. Okay, and perhaps what happens when you get knocked out completely is that the soul goes out of existence, maybe that, and then comes back into being when the brain recovers, just like when you cut off the current to your coil of wire, the magnetic field stops. They seem content with this view. I think they should be worried. If I were a dualist, I'd be worried about this. I'm going to tell you why it worries me, and then I'll stop. Okay, so emergent dualism makes two, I think, very surprising claims. First of all, it's that ordinary physical processes create thinking beings from nothing, ex nihilo. Okay, so again, in the process of embryonic development, when your brain is growing and getting wired up and so on in the womb at whatever stage it is, the story is that it at some point produces a thinking thing, a soul, an immaterial thinking thing. Okay, out of nothing, not out of previously existing material, but out of nothing. Okay. This is something that is unknown to science, as far as I know. It doesn't just, so the nervous system doesn't just produce a certain sort of activity, right? If it just produced mental activity, then you would expect that activity to be activity of the animal itself. Okay, and if the animal is engaged in mental activity, then it's thinking. It seems there's no difference between producing mental activity and thinking, not that I can see. Anyway, so it has to produce a thinking thing. So it's not like creating a dance by moving in a certain way, right? I can move in a certain way and create a dance. So I create a certain activity. I'm not very good at this, am I? I have to practice it. It's more like creating a dancer, right? And not creating a dancer in the usual way by having a child and giving it lots of dancing lessons and so on. But out of nothing, from no, right? Okay, that's what has to happen. Okay, so the question, it's not a physical thing that the organism creates, but a non-physical thing, but it's still a thing, a thinking thing. It's what metaphysicians call a substance. That's why it's called substance dualism. Substance in the technical philosophical sense means a thing that is not an activity or a state or an aspect or a property of something else. It's an independently existing thing, like a substance. So the nervous system creates a thing that thinks. That clear? So the body produces mental activity by creating a new thing that engages in that activity. Right? It's not that it engages in that activity itself, because again, it's part of the dualist picture that a physical thing cannot think. It can only be attached to a thinking soul. It creates this thing out of nothing. So it produces mental activity by creating a new thing and enabling it to think somehow or other. Okay, so that's the first surprising thing, that it creates this thinking thing out of nothing. All right. Second surprising claim is that, well, although dogs and chickens and human embryos have the extraordinary power to create thinking beings ex nihilo, they lack the ordinary power to think. Again, it's part of the picture that no material thing could have any mental property at all, right? Being a material thing and being a thinking thing are exclusive or incompatible. So the neural activity in the brain can only produce mental activity in something else, in the soul. So a physical organism can produce thinking only by creating a new being and causing that thing to think somehow or other. Yeah. So the brain isn't just sufficient to produce thinking, isn't just necessary, as the head injury case shows, but also sufficient. That's what the emergent dualist position. Okay. But this thinking activity is not activity of the organism or of the brain, but rather of the soul. Right? So it produces the soul and enables the soul to think. So it attributes to material things a surprising combination of godlike powers to produce thinking things ex nihilo and radical disabilities, the inability to have any sort of mental life whatsoever. Right? So a physical organism like this one cannot think. It can't think anymore, or think or be conscious or have any mental life any more than a stone can have. But it can produce out of nothing a thinking thing with all of these philosophical powers that I've got. Yeah, so that makes sense. So this enormously complex brain is not there to think, but rather to produce an immaterial thinking thing, right? That is conscious and can do philosophy and ask questions and so on. That seems very strange to me. That these two claims are surprising individually, but their combination is even more surprising. Okay, and this, to my mind, is what would worry me most if I were a dualist. This sort of worry. Okay, so here's the sort of situation. So emergent dualism answers certain questions. It tells us where the soul comes from. It's produced by the body, by a natural process. Okay? It tells us why physically normal animals of the right sort have always got mental lives. Right? Why you never find a physically normal human being with no mental life at all. It's because every animal of that sort produces a soul of the right sort by a natural process, by some natural law that we don't know about. It tells us why physically similar animals have got similar mental lives, why a physical duplicate of Nick wouldn't have the mental life of a toddler or a dog, right? But here are some questions that it doesn't answer. It doesn't tell us how the body creates a thinking substance, thinking thing, out of nothing and sustain it in being. It doesn't tell us why the soul can't think without the body's help. it doesn't tell us how the body enables the soul to function, as what sort of help the body gives the soul, and it doesn't tell us why the body itself cannot think. That's in addition to the traditional questions that arise for substance dualism. And then how do the soul and body communicate? That's the very old interaction problem. And why the soul is not observable or detectable with scientific instruments. That's another mystery that goes all the way back to Descartes' day. All right. So what dualists are inclined to say at this point, I think what they should say, what I would say if I were a dualist, is that, well, all of these phenomena are governed by contingent laws of nature. Okay, by laws of nature, I mean the sorts of laws that you learn about in science class. The laws of gravitation and electromagnetism and friction and all that stuff. The laws about how the world works. That's what it's in the business of science to discover. Natural laws. Okay, so there are natural laws that connect what happens in the brain with what happens in the soul. And these are laws that we can only discover by observation, by doing science. And we haven't discovered any of them yet, but maybe in the future we will. But we cannot expect to know these laws a priori. That is just by sitting in our chair and thinking deeply. So that's why we don't know the answer to these questions. We don't know how the body enables the soul to function, because you can't know it just by thinking about it. You can only know it by doing science. So why can't material things think? Why can't the soul think all by itself without the body's help? How does the brain's neural activity enable the soul to think? How does it create the soul in the first place? And so on, all of these hard questions. Well, what the dualist should say is that, well, these things just happen. Yeah, we don't know how. We shouldn't expect to know how. It's just a fact about nature. And maybe we'll find out how these things. Maybe we'll find out the answer to these questions by doing science in the future. But we shouldn't expect to know right now. So we shouldn't be able to worry too much about not knowing the answers. Yeah? Does that make sense? Some a little bit anyway. Good. Okay.
It's about 45.
Okay. I'm nearly at the end. Okay. Thank you for stopping me. Okay. So I think this is a troubling response, and the reason is that, well, the dualist is conceding that mental activity arises out of brain activity in a mysterious way, a way that we know nothing about. We know nothing about how the brain produces the soul and sustains it and being enables it to think and so on. Okay, and that tends to undermine the very reason for accepting dualism in the first place. Why would anyone suppose that there is a soul? Why would anyone suppose that it's immaterial things that think, that have mental lives, and not material things? Why suppose that it's impossible for a material thing to think? If it's a mystery how thinking arises, then for all we know, the body itself might think in a mysterious way. Right? The usual. Will this have to be guided by empirical observation or by science? Okay, but there's no scientific or empirical evidence for dualism. Okay. Some people think it's supported by certain facts, certain observations to do with paranormal phenomena. I think that's been debunked, but I don't know the details. I don't think that is the case. The arguments for dualism that the dualists themselves give, the philosophers, what makes philosophers dualists is not any scientific findings, but rather a priori arguments, metaphysical philosophical arguments, right? Like the thought that, well, if you think about how a brain works and look at all of its chemical and electrical activity and so on, it just doesn't seem like any of that could amount to anything mental. This is the sort of thinking that supports dualism, but what happens in head injuries shows that somehow what the brain does produce something mental, right? Because it somehow creates a soul and enables the soul to think. That's a mystery. But if there's a mystery, then we may as well accept that it's the brain itself or the animal that thinks in some mysterious way. So it looks like we'll end up all these arguments for dualism are now threatened. Okay, so my wise conclusion is that the dualist accounts of what happens in head injuries threaten to undermine the main arguments for dualism in the first place. That's it. Sorry.
Thank you, Aaron. Take have a seat there.
I'd rather stand actually, because
Oh yeah, I'm say up there.
I'm a sort of I'd like to face.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a bit nervous when I'm on the stage. So.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, I'm sure we'll have quite a few questions. I do have Adrian. I think I can see Adrian. We'll get you a microphone. And the first thing, while we get some questions from the audience, that struck me, if I could ask just the first question is, do you think we're getting a bit, or the dualists are getting a bit too excited about what's physical and what's a substance? Because it seems to me you could get most of the work done that dualists want the soul to do by saying it's a special activity that a material thing does. And you talked about magnetic fields being a kind of metaphor for it, and magnetic field isn't a substance exactly. Why do you think dualists are so fixed on there being a substance of a special sort rather than just a special activity that material things might do?
Well, that's the dualist view.
Yeah.
Okay. If you think that mental activity, thinking, consciousness, and so on is a perception, is an activity of a physical thing, the organism, then you're a materialist. Right? Because you're the thing engaging in the mental activity, so that it follows that you are a material thing. That's materialism. Okay. It may be that there's something special about mental activity as opposed to brain activity. Okay, maybe mental activity is in some sense a non-physical activity, whatever that is, whatever that would mean. Okay, but that's still a version of a version of materialism. That make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Good. Shall we take a few questions or comments from the audience? I can see one over on the left. Do we have any others yet? Yeah, we've got one at the back afterwards. I can see. Great.
Thank you for your talk, Professor. So one thing that always bothers me in these modern discussions on dualism is that heliomorphic dualism gets ignored most of the time, which is a tradition that starts all the way in Aristotle. And a lot of the points you raised against dualism do not even apply to heliomorphic dualism, because there's no substance dualism. The body is the human being is a full substance, and the soul is just the form of the body. Some aspects of the soul are immaterial, and this is required even in Aristotle to explain the fact that we can abstract things. There's nothing material about the concept of a tree. The fact that we have intentionality in the mind, that we think about things, right, which cannot be explained by a material process at all. So I wonder, have you looked into heliomorphic dualism? There are even some modern philosophers who discuss it.
Yes, good. Yes. So this hylomorphic view is the idea that an organism is somehow a compound of matter and form, and Aristotle and Aquinas call the form a soul. Suke, I believe, is the Greek word, and I've said nothing whatsoever about this view. And that's because I would consider hylomorphism a version of materialism. Okay, as you say, the hylomorphists deny that there is an immaterial thinking substance. They think the thinking thing is the animal. Yeah, but they think the animal is a compound of matter in form, and the form is somehow something not entirely physical. Okay, it's something that and the detail. I don't understand the details, and I don't actually understand how it works at all. It seems to me it's a mystery to me. I'm supposed to be teaching it to my undergraduates this semester. I'm not sure what I'm going to say. I'll tell them about the hylomorphous thing, tell them why I don't understand it, and hope that something useful. Hope they learn something from it. Maybe it will become less mysterious to me, but that's a different subject, a different talk. Yes, my arguments had entirely to do with Cartesian dualism and not with hylomorphic dualism. And in fact, it's not usually called hylomorphic dualism at all. It's certainly not a dualism of, it's not the view that there are thinking things and then material things, nothing can be both. That's not hylomorphism. And hylomorphism is the view that certain special material things, like dogs and cats and human beings, are both material and also thinking. It's just that well, the view might be that there's something essentially non-physical about thinking. I'm not sure about that. That's probably because the view was developed in the Middle Ages or in the ancient people. There's Aristotle's version and there's St. Thomas's version of it in the Middle Ages, and they were developed long before we have the present-day concept of the physical as opposed to the non-physical. So, is that? I probably already said too much. Does that answer your question?
I would say I don't agree with your description that much. I think for human beings specifically, the claim is that the soul is substantially immaterial and subsists the body because there's even Aristotle hints at that. But anyway, I think that would take a long discussion. But I could make another comment in that although I don't agree with the idea that you have to show the soul empirically, that's already a bit of petition critique because you're assuming some sort of materialism to say that. But even empirical data of patients in beds or hospital that can tell what happened during their operation when they are unconscious, this kind of thing has been studied. They're not paranormal activity. This kind of thing will not be explained by a materialistic way.
All right. Well, yeah. I'm not qualified to discuss these particular cases, and it's better if I don't. Better if I don't stick my neck out here.
We have another question at the back, Adrian. I think if I put two at the back, I think the lady behind as well had one. So maybe we'll take both.
Hello, thank you for your fascinating talk. I'm just simply lost as a doctor here. I'm just sorry to be maybe not as philosophical as the rest of you. Just to talk about a little bit of neuroscience, and we have some answers for the questions you asked that we do not have answers, and we have a conscious and subconscious. So when we're talking about thinking things, I think you mean mind and connection with body. Mind and body can be actually linked on the level of physical destruction of the brain, and then you losing mind, such as consequence of dementia, mental health, etc. After this famous picture of it, I think on the left-hand side, with sort of boxing. So, and we know them; they have developed lots of brain injuries and mental health issues. So I think you're talking about mind rather than sort of soul, because soul is, I do agree that it's an immaterial thing, and we can go in a very deep discussion here. But second question is how we know chickens think. When you say the thinking thing, so how we know that, and how can you demonstrate that is actually the case? Thank you.
Remember that, okay, first of all, take the second question first. Remember that by thinking, I just mean anything involving a mental life or psychology. So I assume that chickens can feel pain and that they can suffer. That's why there's a law against cruelty to animals. We don't have laws against cruelty to stones because you can't be cruel to a stone because a stone cannot suffer. But a chicken, I take it, can suffer. Now, of course, I can't prove that. I could be mistaken, but I think that's what the experts tell me. Anyway. That's how it seems to me. I did not use the word mind, or I don't think I did. I was careful to avoid that word because the word mind is a dangerous word in philosophy. Because when you talk about the mind, in particular when you talk about minds as countable objects, that sort of conjures up the thought of some mental thing. But it sounds odd to say that I have a mind, or that a mind is standing and pacing back and forth on the stage. That suggests that Olson's mind must be something different from the animal that's pacing back and forth. And that's already a sort of partition dualism, and I want to avoid that. I talked about physical organisms, and I talked about souls in the Cartesian sense, which I don't believe in. Okay, but I'm talking about them, and I'm talking about mental activities and mental properties, right? Being conscious, having preferences and beliefs and memories, and so on. Does that address your question?
There was also the idea that maybe the soul could be doing something else rather than doing the thinking. Was that part of the?
Again,
maybe the thinking is nothing to do with the soul.
The word soul has many different meanings, and there are views according to which something called the soul doesn't just have a mental life and think and have experiences and remember and so on, but also well, on the Aristotelian view, for example, what Aristotle called the soul is responsible for the living functioning of the body as well. Without the soul, there would just be matter, unformed matter. Okay, and that's not the sort of soul that the Cartesians are talking about. So the Cartesian view is that the soul and the body is that the body is independent of the soul. The body is a machine. It's a purely physical object made of matter, and it functions according to the laws of physics. And the soul is something else. And the body's functioning does not require a soul. Right? The soul is just responsible for the psychology. So I have not discussed the view that there is a soul that does something other than thinking. I didn't talk about that sort of view. And I don't know what to say. I mean, well, I need to know more about what sort of view you're talking about. But that's not a view that is discussed in Western philosophy. It is contemporary Western philosophy. Again, the word soul is dangerous. You need to say it's a technical term. Okay, and I was using it in one particular carefully defined technical sense. Yeah.
Let's take a question from just behind you. It's very dark out there.
I can't see anything.
Yeah, we can hear you well.
This is a little bit similar, so I think the answer will probably be similar. If you can think something, it might make it possible to influence a physical body. And I tend to, being a physio, I think I use that quite a lot.
Yeah.
To try and get people to think about a movement or think about doing something, and use the power of thought to enable the body to move or whatever. And the other thing is, I had a patient the other day who said, I think my back is due to the fact that I'm under a lot of stress. Now that's a thought that he has, and that's why his body wasn't functioning. So how do you explain that? I may be missing the point here, but I'm trying to link the mind.
So the mental events causing the physical events.
Yeah.
How's that bit work?
Yeah.
On a materialistic account, you mean?
Yes.
Yes. So, okay, good. So I talked about the interaction between the soul and the body that takes place in action and perception. So my arm rises when I make it rise, when I have the intention to raise it or something, or the act of will to raise it or whatever it is. Okay, that's the most common sort effect of the mental on the physical. Okay, now I think what you're talking about is more indirect effects. Okay, so if I'm worried about something, that might make me slower to raise my arm, or it might give me indigestion, or whatever. There are all sorts of psychosomatic effects where certain sorts of thought processes that are not intentions to move have an effect on the body. Okay, and I've said nothing about that. That's just that's something that I just sort of skipped over and didn't mention. I don't think it makes a difference to the philosophical point that I was talking about. It's still, according to materialism, all this mental activity is something going on in the brain. It's a physical activity in the brain. Okay. And according to dualism, it's all something non-physical in the immaterial soul. The questions about how the soul connects, how the soul interacts with the body and why the soul depends on the body, these questions arise all the same, whether we're talking about those sorts of psychosomatic phenomena or whether we're talking about ordinary action. Does that make sense?
I think linking it back to what you were saying about the tough questions for dualists, we don't have a perfect understanding of how material events in the brain correspond to particular thoughts yet, but as our understanding of the correspondence between brain and thought gets better informed and less mysterious, it seems to me it gets harder for the substance dualists to say, well, these are just mysterious things that we, on the dualist account, the link is just a mysterious thing that we can never expect to understand. It becomes a correspondingly less good explanation.
Yes, I mean the connection between the mental and the physical, between your mental life and your physical life, is not entirely understood. Even quite apart from any of these metaphysical philosophical issues, even in medicine, as you pointed, the physiotherapists and the doctors and all these people in white coats, they don't know exactly, they don't entirely understand how your mental life affects your physical, affects your health and your movements and so on. It's of course we know that you can raise your arm by intending to or whatever. We know about that, but we don't know very well how worries or stress can cause back problems or can affect your digestion or affect your blood pressure or whatever. That's just a bit of a mystery in science. I'm not sure whether that makes a difference to the philosophical points that I've been talking about. I think that not sure.
I think we had a couple of questions at the front. Yes, Adrian, if you come down to the left and then to Barbara on the right.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for that. I think you've made a very clearly articulated, convincing case against dualism. But it also seems to me that the materialism can't really deal with the hard problem of consciousness any more easily than dualism can. So, I mean, Descartes felt that the evidence, the soul was, I think, therefore I am. He felt there were a few certainties in life. That was one of them. That was sufficient proof that we have a soul. We have this immaterial thing that we call ourself or our soul. And it's not. It doesn't feel to me that materialism has any better chance of explaining the hard problem, solving the hard problem of consciousness.
Can you say briefly what you mean by the hard problem of consciousness?
By the way, the microphone, you have to talk right.
Sorry, okay.
There you go.
The hard problem of consciousness is that we seem to have these feelings and these thoughts which seem to be very apparently non-material. in the same way that Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, was the evidence for this immaterial soul. So that we can have a materialistic physiological explanation of how the brain works and how the brain is part of the central nervous system and can create, has experiences and things, but it can't really explain the issue of consciousness.
Okay.
Explain how we feel or how we experience, how an individual experiences the world.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is that we don't know what the connection is between what happens in the brain, all of that chemistry and electricity and all that stuff, all that physical stuff, and our mental lives. And in particular, when it comes to the way it appears to us in consciousness. So the way that I feel, it's difficult to articulate. It's what the philosophers of mind call phenomenal consciousness, which is very difficult to characterize.
The nature of experience.
Something to do with what it's like for me right now in my experience. Okay. And there seems to be something sort of ineffable and intangible about that, about how it appears and the connections. Somehow we know that it arises out of the brain, but we don't know how. And that's true. We don't know how. And there's lots of work to be done in brain science about the connection between the brain physiology and all sorts of aspects of psychology. And it's simply saying that materials must show where material things and the mental is physical, of course, doesn't answer any of those questions. It doesn't even tell us very much. I think it's nevertheless true. I think it doesn't help to say that phenomenal consciousness is not something that goes on in the body, but rather in an immaterial soul. That doesn't help.
I agree.
That's not going to make it any less mysterious. It's not going to help the science. That just makes it more or less unknowable. So the question of what accounts for phenomenal consciousness is completely independent of the question whether we have a soul or not. So, I mean, I think I'm agreeing with you.
Okay.
Thank you. Let's go to Margaret here, and then do we have any other questions? Yeah. Over to you, Margaret.
I just have this belief that we can observe the entire entity that we are.
Right into the microphone, by the way. There you go.
Okay.
Before you get started.
That we actually feel and observe and have some kind of understanding of all of our entity, if you like, which makes us individuals and human beings. The reason why I'm thinking of this is that I've had a near-death experience lately myself. And I actually was taken into hospital, and then I wasn't aware of anything anymore. And then I had a thought, and the thought was, yes, I've had a very interesting life, and lots of people helped me along the way, and wasn't that good? And then I had these terrible shocks. And it was when they were actually giving me shocks to the heart. And they then said, oh, you've got septicemia, septic shock, you've got COVID, you've got all these other things. But then I thought, yes, I was obviously aware, even though I was unconscious, I was aware that I was near death, that I could have died, which is what they told me. So I think that there is very much a knowledge of everybody. Sometimes some people know it more
and other people are less aware of all the things that encompass you as a human being. And I don't think there is anything separate. There is us and as an entire entity. And I think that that's why we are puzzled, because we only observe certain parts of us. That's
Thank
all
you.
I want.
Thank you. Sounds a bit like you're being invited to comment again on unusual mental phenomena, which you
Well,
resisted last time.
Yes, I mean, of course, there's lots that we don't understand, both about psychology and about physiology and about the connection between the two. That's true, and I haven't been talking about any of that stuff. That's I think mostly independent of the metaphysical question about the soul that I've been concerned with. One thing you said actually raised the question of what it actually is to be unconscious. Now, I said that if you get hit on the head, it makes you unconscious. But the case that you're talking about is where you said you were unconscious in the sense of being unresponsive, but you were still aware. You had some limited awareness of what was going on. So there was some mental activity going on, though not sort of very lucid or clear, or not full.
But it was not to do with what other people were doing. It was to do with my particular self, the
Yes.
way that I was.
Yes.
So it's not like some people have this idea that you can see yourself lying there and, you know, from above or all sorts of things. No, this was just as reinforcing in a way this thought that, yes, this is the state that I am now in. And how you think of your life, just as you're maybe about to depart it, you know.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything very wise to say about this. about this case. Yeah, I'm not. Well, there isn't any obvious connection. There's not quite a connection that I'm seeing between your fascinating story and this dry metaphysical debate that I've been talking about. That's.
Well, it's just that I don't believe in a soul and a body. I believe everything is all in one entity.
Yeah, so you weren't offering this as evidence for dualism, but it did sound a bit like the sort of drone operator and the drone, in the sense of, you know, the senses had shut down, but there was still some mental activity going on in the brain. You know?
Yes, it may be that damage to the brain can completely stop mental activity, or it can hinder it, like in the case of alcohol that I mentioned, or in the case of, you know, the man on the canvas there, he's not totally unconscious, but he's a bit woozy, of course, and there are all sorts of intermediate cases. So that's probably my phone.
Yeah, it's me too. I'll tell off the audience, but I realised I should clean my mouth shut, I think.
I do apologize.
There may, however, be someone telling you need to leave to catch your train. So I think we're probably.
No, that's just my partner who's making
Well, I think we are running out of time, so I think it would be probably a good point to wrap up now and say a huge thank you to you, Eric, for joining us and talking to us. Thanks to my helpers of all sorts around the room, and to all of you for coming. We do have another talk coming up on the 22nd of October. And we were going to hear about immoral art and artists, but that has now moved to January, because these days, excitingly, academics only hear about their teaching schedules sort of the week before or the day before, rather than 6 months in advance or whatever it used to be. And so Daisy's now moved to January. But we do have, thanks to Paul, who's been doing sterling work as our emergency speaker organizer, We have Dr. Suki Finn, who's a lecturer at Royal Holloway University, and she's going to be talking to us about the metaphysics of pregnancy. Yes. What's that, you are wondering? Well, the sciences, she says, have added immensely to our knowledge of reproduction. I think we can all agree. So it's natural to think that questions about pregnancy are best left within the scientific domain. But this thought is mistaken. There are philosophical issues about pregnancy that remain unanswered, leaving many aspects of pregnancy a mystery. And her talk is going to focus on one such philosophical aspect of pregnancy, specifically whether the fetus is a part of or contained by the pregnant person, and what ethical difference that distinction may make. So if you're interested in that, you can book on at osoarts.org.uk/philosophy club, or if you can just find the OSO homepage, we're under theatre and events in bright red. We're the only option in bright red. So paid extra for that. And don't click on Pilates philosophy instead. That is a different thing. And if you came here expecting Pilates, we can do that in the bar afterwards. So do stay for a drink. And thank you very much, everyone. Lovely talking.
you.